All right, so I'm going to ask a lot of leaders wanting to work in our programs to consider this conversation because, well, I'm making this video at a time of high uncertainty and also a time where opinions run high, but facts seem to often run uh, quite low. So, in that spirit, I'm making this video to one, share my best ideas with you so you can consider them and perhaps share them with your community because it's clear to me what is happening around the world is also affecting us locally, no matter where that is. And in times like this, we're in some ways asked to choose to pick a side. What side? Well, that's always up to the individual. But my role and my position, I've had a chance to study history quite a lot, to really have free time to read and study and learn and reflect on the lessons of history. And also in my profession, I've made my career on identifying and securing accurate information and data. That's how my career works. And well, there's a lot of opinions out there, and a lot of us are carrying unchallenged opinions in our brain, and that's why I see you frustrated, stuck, not feeling heard, not feeling you have a voice, not feeling like you've got power and authority in your workplace, in where you sit in your workplace, not being able to find a career or an opportunity where you feel like your voice is heard. It's all connected. There's no real independence in that sense, and we're all connected. But when we each seek to be strong in ourselves, then our voice can be heard more clearly. And so, in that spirit, this conversation that I'm going to bring up today is about what does it mean to make difficult decisions as a leader, unpopular decisions as a leader, decisions as a leader that may not pay off ever, decisions as a leader that you make because it's likely that there will be a payoff based on life experience, based on knowing what it means to make a hard decision that is dangerous and will put people in harm's way. That's what it means to be a leader in a lot of ways. And so if you're wondering, how to improve my position, how to improve my pay, how to improve, my ability to navigate the world with more freedom and more respect, the ability to understand others, it does come down to difficult conversations in knowing how to make difficult decisions, not just making them, but knowing how to make them and see them through. So I'm making this video also in part because my business partner and technology partner and friend, Jay, who is based out of London, he's a technology director, and he comes from Lebanon. He comes from a place in the world where he was in harm's way frequently as a result of various ideologies and interpretations of ideologies and what should be done about them. And, well, who's had time to sit around and read all these things and learn all these things? I sit in a rare place this way where I have unique insights, but that doesn't mean I have all the answers. I'm not here saying I'm right, but what I did do today is I spent some time with Perplexity. If you haven't used Perplexity or Perplexity Pro, it's an AI tool that I use to accelerate my research, accelerate my ability to verify, and also contest maybe unfounded opinions that I adopted that I didn't challenge. Whether it's religion or political ideology, or anytime somebody's at that ideological edge where they're emotionally unsettled or compromised, most of the time they are operating from opinion and not fact, especially fact that they've researched and verified. So at the end of the day, what do we really know? As I make this video, America is taking military action to overthrow a supposed illegitimate government that's had, according to the American narrative, 47 years to bring prosperity, fairness, and stability to that region, in which I tend to agree they failed. Now, I'm not in a place to decide who takes military action or who doesn't, other than with my votes. And we're sitting with a president who has made those decisions, a president that I actually didn't vote for, but he's still my president. He's still our president. In a lot of ways, I'm along for that ride. And I made a decision about 10 years ago, and one you might want to make today. What does it mean to criticize leadership, no matter what it is? What does it mean to criticize? Because we can often, it's popular to spout at the mouth criticisms. Oh, that guy over there and this guy over there. And what most people are really doing is circulating an opinion they heard on the news, oh, this guy did that and this and that. And it's really just a low power beta energy. It's really just, it's a type of, emotional circle jerk of non-productive activity. So in the spirit of turning convictions and concerns into knowledge and information, what I see happening and whether or not America will survive this incursion, I think it's likely that it will. I think this time is going to transform all nations and how power is perceived and how power is applied across the world, perhaps permanently, because we all have 4K cameras and satellite internet on our pockets pretty much these days, except unless you live in a country where they don't let you have internet. To me, nothing really says, you might be dealing with some oppressive leaders, when they take out your internet, right? So I think it's fair to say that it's a fact that there's a heavy degree of military aggression, assertion, right? What's the language? And what does language mean at the end of the day? There's a heavy degree of military activity happening that's likely to change the balance of power. To me, nobody wins a war. You don't win a war. Everybody loses in war. The question is how much and then what happens after. And this is what I'm here to talk about. As a leader who I'm going to invite to make challenging decisions around our companies, around our teams. Somebody wants to talk about, oh, this and that, or all this religion and that religion, or all this opinion, or hey, they did this wrong. They hit, the U.S. hit a school. It's likely right now that we're seeing that maybe a U.S. missile hit a school that was built beside a military base. Well, yeah. What about it? And what do we do about it? At a time where people are quite divided about this, I don't think it's smart to stay silent. Now, that doesn't mean you go blather at the mouth and regurgitate untested, unverified, secondhand opinions that just so happens to align with what? Your political opinions? I don't care about your political opinion. And you shouldn't care about mine either. What are we willing to do as people, as a society, about what we actually care about? Because this doesn't mean you care about anything. Usually you just learn how to gossip and slander from people around you. It makes you feel important for a minute. It might get you acceptance from a certain group of people, a certain group of relatively low intelligence people that aren't exercising the potential and intelligence they have to spout out one-sided political ideology that they got from their friend or a news channel that is probably, questionable at best. So, I want to spend some time with perplexity here. The question that I asked is, what is the best way to help Iran establish a less oppressive government? How do we take what we learned from from Palestine electing Hamas in the early 2000s and prevent a cycle like that from repeating? And a lot of you don't even know what that is. But it was an attempt from many nations with great cost to attempt to help a nation form its own representative democracy. So, well, we see how that went. I'm not saying I got any better answers than anybody, but what I am saying is I'm willing to stand and help build useful things for our communities and, try to live a good life where most other people can live a good life as well. As long as you don't oppress others and try to impose your beliefs on others, it works pretty well. So, here's what Perplexity had to say based on 15 sources and references. I'll put the link to this research thread below, and you can research it and look at it as well, read it through if you like. But I'm going to read it because, well, why not? So, a less oppressive future in Iran is most likely to come from strengthening pluralistic, accountable opposition and institutions over time, not from trying to pick winners overnight. The Hamas case shows that if you only open the ballot box without fixing structural distortions, corruption and polarization as well, you can easily empower another repressive actor. So key lessons from the Hamas election. Hamas won a parliamentary majority in 2006 with about 44% of the popular vote because Fatah's vote was fragmented, corruption was rampant, and institutions were weak. Not because most Palestinians consciously chose maximalist violence. This is a big deal. Anybody who has any understanding of this timeline of what happened over the last 20 years, it's a big deal. And a lot of people that so-called experts, they missed this lesson. A lot of people spouting, on YouTube, hundreds of thousands of views, they missed this lesson. And we're about to repeat it if we're not smart about this. The movement had already built a dense network of mosques, charities, schools, and social services that created loyalty and normalized its ideology well before the election. International actors pushed for quick elections without first ensuring checks and balances, unified security forces, or rules preventing one faction from seizing the state. When Hamas took Gaza in 2007, there were few institutional breaks. BRAKES. Like, how do we slow this down? How do we check power, right? Checks and balances. That's what most democracies are built on. Or in fact, all stable democracies, checks and balances of power, which includes separation of church and state. That's the ones where we see, coming from the West, we see some of our friends in countries in the Middle East, the separation of church and state is not something that's natural to them. But I can only draw the conclusion, this is my personal opinion, that it's essential if you want a stable government that doesn't end up turning into an oppressive force. All right, so back to perplexity. After the vote, external isolation of the elected authority strengthened hardliners, deepened factional conflict with Fatah, and incentivized repression as the main tool of governance. Structural fixes to avoid Hamas-style outcomes. Perplexity breaks down some further bullet points. Design electoral systems that avoid winner-take-all outcomes from minority plurality. Examples: proportional representation with thresholds. Rules against fractured party lists. Build independent judiciaries, media, and security sector oversight before or alongside elections so no party can easily monopolize coercive power. Next, tie international recognition and aid to clear standards. Renunciation of terrorism, respect for pluralism, and protection of civil liberties, instead of only, did they win an election? Invest long-term in non-sectarian social services, unions, and civic organizations so extremists are not the only ones providing welfare and identity. Applying those lessons to Iran. Iran today has simultaneous mass discontent, fragmented opposition, and a regime that has systematically crushed independent organization. To all my friends that think this is the wrong action, this is the wrong move, well, nobody wins a war. Nobody wants to make a decision to win a war if only being peaceful kept the peace. What's the difference between wanting peace and actually being able to keep peace? This is a question that as Americans we have to ask ourselves. Because if only we could be nice enough and gentle enough and politically correct enough and appeasing enough and sending pallets of cash to, people around the world. Come on, we can do better. We have to do better. Money alone isn't going to solve, sending pallets of money, as we saw through a couple previous administrations. It doesn't really work. So, protests in Iran since 2022 and again in 2025, 2026 have been large and recurrent, but lack unified leadership, clear institutional vehicles, or agreed transition plans, in part because the state has repressed opinions, student groups, NGOs, and parties for decades. Opposition figures exist inside and outside Iran: women, life, freedom networks, labor activists, monarchists, Republicans, leftists, but they are divided and lack a commonly accepted transitional roadmap. So what helping, perplexity, parentheses, help, because help can be a four-letter word sometimes, right? Is sending pallets of money to violent jihadis? Sending pallets of money to violent jihadis? Is that the answer? In some ways, you got to try things, right? I don't think sending pallets of US dollars to violent jihadis, maybe kick the can down the road, right? And the only way you learn is by trying things. Life is a science experiment at the end of the day. So from the outside, the most constructive moves are indirect and patient, aimed at conditions rather than personalities. We can learn a lot from Hamas Palestine and everybody's well-meaning efforts and high fives and the billions that were put through the UN. that, well, you can research that if you don't know where those billions that the Western nations gave the UN to attempt to build a fair and equitable Palestine. Didn't happen that way. That's why we're here in this situation. Most people don't know this. Most people want to take opinions about, oh, this guy and that, those are the bad people. You know, most people don't know. They don't even know how it happened. But everybody's got an opinion and picks sides. I don't know. So, what to avoid? Pushing for snap regime change elections without prior work on legal safeguards, party pluralism, and media freedom, which risks another empowered authoritarian faction. Backing one exiled faction or strongman as the anointed alternative, which can delegitimize them domestically, and recreate a narrow, unaccountable elite. A narrow, unaccountable elite. All nations are challenged with that these days, aren't we? Perhaps forever, especially the more wealthy a nation becomes. Heavy-handed intervention, covert or overt, that lets the regime paint all opposition as a foreign puppets, a narrative Tehran already uses efficiently. So, what to prioritize? Support the rebuilding of independent civic infrastructure, teachers, councils, labor unions, student groups, women's networks, and professional associations that already play a role in strikes and protests. Encourage inclusive opposition coalitions that explicitly commit to pluralism, non-sectarianism, minority rights, and limits on executive power while planning a transitional charter before any revolutionary rupture. Back secure communication tools, diaspora, inside networks, and independent Persian language media so Iranians can coordinate and debate options without state filters. Tie future sanctions relief and economic integration not just to nuclear issues, but to measurable human rights and rule of law benchmarks, giving both regime elites and opposition a clear incentive structure. So it goes on to list concrete ideas to reduce the Hamas scenario risk. Here, the focus is on making it harder for any single illiberal force, Islamist, monarchist, or otherwise, if you know the history of Iran, Islamist, monarchist, or otherwise, to capture the post-Islamic Republic state. Some of you say, well, I'm not going to be involved with this. This isn't for me. I want you to think about what it means to understand these words, understand that instability in another part of the world can often mean instability in your part of the world. We're seeing this in a big way now. We live in a global society now, whether we like it or not. So, we want to avoid winner-take-all identities, aim to prevent armed capture, normalize pluralism, which means a voice has a seat at the table, reward moderation, protect minorities. By the way, if you want a link, there's a grid here. I'm not going to go into all that, but there's a whole chart. It's pretty smart. If you fancy yourself a problem solver, you want to be informed about this and focus on actual solutions, not slinging mud at your whatever political adversary. Like, who taught us this silly game? We get to transcend this stuff, guys. Who taught us a silly game of political mudslinging? You just look so silly. For someone outside Iran who wants to move things in this direction, back independent Persian language outlets, research centers, and rights groups that amplify diverse Iranian voices instead of single favorite action. Support asylum and education pathways for activists, journalists, and organizers so the future leadership pool is broad and experienced, not just militant or dynastic figures. Press your own government to synchronize Iran policy, align sanctions, diplomacy, and messaging around human rights and pluralism, not just security or energy interests. Engage with diaspora groups that are experimenting with inclusive charters and transitional roadmaps and nudge them towards clear commitments against all forms of authoritarianism, whether religious or secular. If you imagine you had a real influence over Western government's Iran policy, would you rather focus that leverage on shaping the transition rules, constitutional elections, security sector, or backing particular opposition forces and organizations. This is where perplexity is pretty cool. And again, you can check that link out here in the comments. It then gives you other questions that you don't even think to ask, and it's ready to help you answer them. I don't use any other AI tools because I don't need to, but a lot of my team does. But I like Perplexity Pro. I find it's more about focusing on evidence-based answers as opposed to sensational entertainment, which I think a lot of the other AI tools do, for better or worse, right? So many of you watching this know that we fund projects, that we fund teams, that we fund community initiatives. You're going to bring your ideas, and it might not be anything about this, but you're smarter because you've thought about this, because you considered what these words mean, and you consider what it means to have power and influence in the world. Because if you're watching this, you're probably operating from a fairly powerful nation, or maybe you're watching this from a nation that you don't feel your nation is powerful, and you might need help from so-called powerful nations helping you overcome systemic corruption and oppression in your government. It all matters because it's all connected. So I look forward to talking to you soon.